What's up, guys? It's Toad yet again. Thanks for all of you who were hanging out in the chat last night for the NFL video. I gave out 2 plays for Sunday. I'm already 1-0 this week with the Jets Thursday night. Today, my 2 NFL plays are Miami plus 6.5 and the New York Giants plus 4. So I think those lines are still pretty much available. I can share my screen here a little bit. I'm not going to add any plays, but I figured I would just comment briefly on the kind of small NHL and NBA cards that we have today, and maybe a little bit more on NFL real quickly. Just basically every lean that I gave out on the show last night talking about the NFL, I still agree with all of that. I mean, I continue to agree with myself, and the market still looks the same as it did last night, basically, on every single one of these things. So I don't know that there's that much to add as far as that's concerned. But to see my analysis on those 2 plays, you can go watch the NFL video. I was pissed off about the 2-3 day yesterday, and I will mention one more thing about that Milwaukee Bucks loss yesterday. They were winning that game by 16 points in the middle of the game, dude, so that makes it even more frustrating. Milwaukee was ahead in that game for more of the game than they were behind, and I think they took the lead again late, although I needed them to cover a 1.5, but I think Lillard hit like a 3 late or something to retake the lead, and then they still lost. Gave up the lead again right at the end. It just sucks, man. But what else can you say about that? So anyway, yeah, go look at my, go check out my NFL video to see the breakdown. I broke down a bunch of these games. I talked about Patriots, Titans, Chargers, Browns, Dolphins, Bills, obviously, because I have a play there. I talked about Broncos, Ravens, Colts, Vikings, because it's a Sunday night game. Redskins, Giants, because I have a play on that one. Rams, Seahawks, Lions, Packers, Jags, Eagles, and Bucks, Chiefs in the Monday night game, which I'll probably talk about further tomorrow. So I talked about all those games in the NFL show, so go check that out. Here I'm just going to briefly run down some of the NHL and NBA, which, again, like I said, I don't have any plays today in these, but just maybe some kind of interesting scenarios here cropping up. Or maybe not even really. I don't think too many of these games are actually that interesting. But I mean, you have some teams that played yesterday. Both Seattle and Boston played yesterday, and they're playing each other. Any of the situations that jumped out at me, I think it was really just kind of Chicago. Anaheim was the one that looked like, oh, this is like kind of a crazy spot here, because Chicago played yesterday as well. They played into overtime, and they beat the LA Kings in overtime. So this looks like probably not the greatest spot, coming off a nice upset win for Chicago and having to go on a back-to-back and play a lesser Anaheim team. So maybe they won't have full focus in that one. And Chicago might have to use Soderblom in net this time because it's a back-to-back. So probably Mrazek will probably not be in net for them this time, and he's their main goaltender there. So he might have a step down in class as far as their goalie is concerned in this game. So that might be one issue for Chicago. But Anaheim, I don't want to play the Anaheim side either, because I was looking at it, I'm like, oh, this might be a spot to go against Chicago. Nah, Anaheim, they're returning home from a road trip that took them to the East Coast. They have had multiple days off, though, but the extra days off might actually exacerbate the return home a little bit, because you get comfortable back at home. You start doing stuff as far as family life is concerned, although in a way you get to put that stuff out of the way and then focus on hockey again. So in baseball, I know that when you play right through and you don't actually have a day off, it's actually less bad. But in these sports, you almost always have a day off in NBA and NHL when you return home from the road trip. So I don't know. I think I consider it to be a somewhat bad spot for Anaheim, though. And they do have a bigger game up next. Vancouver and Minnesota up next. Those are both bigger games. So it's possible that Anaheim does not fully focus on Chicago either. So it is possible maybe the way to look in this game would be to the over. Anaheim down from minus 130 to minus 123, 78% of tickets and only 70% of the cash. So Anaheim looks to be public, and the market looks to be indicating against them. And on the total, 89% of the tickets on the over and 85% of the cash on the under. But the line has moved up a little bit with more juice on the over. Like I said, I think this could be a spot to play an over. I've identified many spots to play overs in hockey so far this year, and I've only played on one of them, unfortunately for me, because I feel like I'm right on like 90% of these plays where I say both of these teams are in a bad spot. The over makes sense. It seems like it happens every time. So maybe it'll happen again here, but that would be the way that I would look in that game. And if I forgot to mention, Chicago, not only did they play last night, but they played this game into overtime and a shootout, actually, after a high-scoring third period where Chicago actually came back from down 2-0 to tie it. And they scored in the final minute to send it into overtime with ex-Bruin Tyler Bertuzzi there, who's now on Chicago. Tied it, and then they wound up winning in the shootout there. Some crazy stuff in that game, man. So Chicago might run out of steam by the end of this game against Anaheim tonight. And then Edmonton-Calgary is somewhat interesting because this is almost like a return home spot for for Edmonton in a way, because Edmonton just went out to Detroit, Columbus, Nashville, and this is a continuation of this road trip technically, but they've had multiple days off and they're returning to Alberta. So you got to think that they're probably returning home for a little while, getting some stuff done at home, and then having to play this game against Calgary. So this looks like kind of that type of like return home distracted spot, even though it is a road game. It is a road game up down in Calgary. But still, it's a situation where I've mentioned it before when LA was returning to like the LA area and they had to play Anaheim. It was almost like they were already returning home. I think that could be the case with Edmonton here, and they had a fairly successful road trip so far, although they probably don't want to drop to 2-2 on it, but still, it looks like a spot where Edmonton might be distracted by the return home situation here, even though the return home technically is tomorrow, but also because they have to play this back-to-back here, and they're back in Alberta, they may be like getting stuff done at home. That might really indicate that they're getting stuff done at home because they have to play games both of these nights and again on Wednesday. So probably they're getting stuff out of the way at home would be my guess, and could be a distracted spot for them. Calgary may be the way to look in this game, though. Calgary is kind of showing that they're not as good as they looked to start the season. I mean, they looked unstoppable to start the season, and they did beat this Edmonton team at Edmonton already. But then since then, they've started slipping a little bit, but they did lose to a lot of good teams in here in Carolina, Winnipeg, Vegas. Those are some of the top teams in hockey. So their worst loss is this Utah one. But Calgary, I mean, I think they're still just kind of a mediocre team. But they're staying at home. They just returned home from a 2-game road trip. One when they returned home against New Jersey, and now they're just kind of staying at home waiting for Edmonton to come in. So it looks like a better spot to me for Calgary. But Edmonton, maybe the one reason why they will still be focused here, or why they could still be focused here, is that Calgary went into their place and beat them already this year. So Edmonton might be a little angry about that. And the line does look like it's way up on Edmonton from -135 to -154. 86% of tickets and 98% of the cash. So it looks like public and some of the actual big money are both on the Edmonton side in this one. But like I said, I am not so sure about that being the right side in that game. And then over in the NBA, we got 3 games here in the NBA. Not very strong opinions on any of these games, really, though. You got Pistons, Nets, with the Nets down from -3 to -2.5. It does look like, as far as the market indicators, this looks like the strongest market indicator on the side of Detroit here, with the Nets being public with 71% of the tickets, 61% of the cash on the Detroit side, and the Nets dropping in the line a little bit. So it does look like Detroit maybe like a pros versus Joes play here as far as the market indicators are concerned. Detroit team's 1-5, but they've actually played many good teams. They've played a really difficult schedule so far, man. Am I convincing myself to play Detroit here? I don't think I'm going to actually do it, but I think that would be the lean here. I mean, look at how difficult this has been so far. Literally every team Detroit has played so far was in the playoffs last year. They played Indiana, Cleveland, Boston, Miami, Philadelphia, and New York, although granted it's an Embiid-less Philadelphia, and that was their one win. But every one of these games is difficult for Detroit. So Detroit sitting at 1-5 doesn't look as bad when the schedule has been this difficult. And they only lost by 6 to Indiana, by 6 to Boston. Or I think Detroit was actually... They were were they way ahead in this Boston game or way behind? I don't remember. I should remember because it was my Celtics. No, the Celtics were way ahead, and Detroit came back and took the lead late, and then the Celtics still were able to come back and win. But Detroit, yeah, they played pretty competitively in those 2 games. Only lost by 8 at Miami, and then they did get blown out in their most recent game by the Knicks, but the Knicks are a pretty good team, man. So Detroit, yeah, I know they were one of the worst teams. They were kind of a laughingstock last year, but they got some, up-and-coming young players here. Cunningham is certainly a really good player, although he is most of their team, really. But I think this Detroit team is not as bad as they look so far, based on how difficult their schedule has been. And this Brooklyn team is actually going to be the weakest opponent they've faced so far. So I do lean to the Detroit side in this one with what the market is indicating. And Brooklyn has played a somewhat less difficult schedule. And they're coming off a couple wins against a couple of their somewhat weaker opponents, Memphis and Chicago, and then coming into this game. So it's not really a particularly bad spot for Brooklyn, but I just think that maybe Detroit's a little bit undervalued, although the line is telling you that the Nets are like not even better than the Pistons, really sitting at 2.5. The line is basically like home court and nothing else for the Nets here, which is kind of crazy to see. So the odds makers not really respecting the Nets a whole lot, but I do agree with the Detroit side in that one. Hawks, Pelicans. Pelicans are down from 4 to 3.5. 55% of the tickets on them, but 58% of the cash on the Pelicans. So it does look like the Pelicans have a little bit of the cash discrepancy, but I'm not so sure about that. You're not going to find me coming in on any of these games. But in the NBA, I think if you wanted to play any of these games, it would be the Detroit Pistons plus the points in that one. But New Orleans, I mean, I think they're not in the greatest spot. I mean, they had a Pacific Coast road trip where they wound up losing every game except the first game against Portland. Granted, they lost 2 of the games to Golden State. So New Orleans, this is a weird schedule, man, where they've played 6 games, but they've only played 4 different opponents because they played these weird double headers against Portland and Golden State. Very strange. And then they came back from the Golden State trip after getting blown out by Golden State basically in both games. They came back home, which normally would look like a pretty bad spot returning home from the Pacific Coast, and it didn't matter, and they beat Indiana. So that's a pretty decent-looking win for New Orleans, and maybe that puts New Orleans in a little bit of a letdown spot coming off of that, playing an Atlanta team that hasn't looked very good so far. So it could be a letdown a little bit for New Orleans. Atlanta, on the other hand, I mean, they need a win. They started out 2-0, and then they haven't won since. And the real glaring thing here for Atlanta is that they lost 2 games in a row to Washington. I don't know what gives with that, because that Washington team is not good. And Atlanta could not beat them either game. So other than that, this looks like pretty reasonable. Like they lost to Oklahoma City and Sacramento. I mean, you can't really fault them for that much because those teams are pretty good. Well, Oklahoma City's really good, but those losses to Washington are pretty glaring, man. And Atlanta does have Boston up next, and that game might loom a little bit on the horizon. They're a little bit of a bigger game than this weird 1-game road trip to New Orleans here. So it seems like not the greatest spot for either team, really, although it could be a better spot for Atlanta just because they've lost so many games. They want to just get out of town and finally get a win, and maybe they won't be looking ahead as much to Boston. So this is a tough one to read in this game. And then Magic Mavs is the other game. 3 games on the slate, so I'll just talk about all of them because fuck it. This is an Orlando Magic team that lost their best player, Banchero, and I think he's going to be out for half the season. Devastating blow to the Orlando Magic. And I thought that they were going to be in a nice injured player theory plus playoff revenge spot against Cleveland, and I lost that play. So Orlando's coming off that, continuing to play on the road, having to go down to Texas. Not an easy spot, but Orlando is getting a lot of points here. So it's tough for me to gauge this game as well, man, because Orlando coming off... That was a big, like, emotional game, though. A game where they were going to get up emotionally for it, and they could not get there and wound up losing the game. So that could maybe hang them over as well. I could see it going both ways. So I don't know if this is going to be more of a hangover spot for them or like a spot where they might like bounce back a little bit. But given that that was like the spot where they were going to step up with the injured player theory there, you usually tend to have a worse game the next time out. But because they lost that game, maybe that won't be as much the case. But Dallas looks like they are kind of in a bounce back spot. This was my one NBA lean the other night. I said I liked the Houston side in that one. I didn't play it, but I wound up being correct on that one. Houston won outright as an underdog at Dallas because I thought Dallas was in a bad spot after playing that big game at Minnesota, and they did have kind of a letdown there. Playing against Houston. Maybe I should have played it. But now that might put Dallas in a little bit of a bounce back spot. It's the second game back home after they didn't play well that first game, even though it wasn't a road trip, really. It was just a one single road game at Minnesota, but they still lost in the return home spot. So I think that puts them in a more positive spot here. So I might actually have to lean to the Dallas side in this one, but you're not really getting much value here, having to lay like 7 points with Dallas. They're down from 7.5 to 7, 75% of the tickets and 100% of the cash. Probably not accurate, but I think it is setting up like it's looking like a situation where the public is on Dallas, but some of the professional money may also wind up coming in on the Dallas side in this one. I'm not so sure. I don't want to like speak when I don't know that that's going to be the case for sure, but that's just kind of how I read that game. It's not a game I'm playing, obviously. So I think that is going to do it. That is the rundown of some of those games there. Johnny, what's up? The slump continues. I had multiple winning days in a row, I think, recently, and then I lost yesterday with the 2-3 day. It was a losing day, but not a horrific day. My college football has been really good this season, man. Very good college football season after 2 very lackluster college football years. I actually think college football over the last 2 seasons was actually my only losing sport, and this year it's one of my best. It's one of my best sports since college football has started. I've been really good this year in college football. I don't know, man. I'm seeing college football really well, and typically NBA is my best sport. I've been excellent in the NBA over the last couple of years, and I'm not off to a good start. I'm 3-5 in the NBA so far, so I need to get that going. But today is not going to be the day where I try to start correcting that. I'm not going to force anything, but the Detroit Pistons looks like it might be the best lean in the NBA, as I already mentioned, and I think that's probably better than any of the NHL sides or plays as well. Though I did like that over a little bit in the NHL between Chicago and Anaheim, and especially if Chicago's backup goalie is playing in that game. It looks like, and Anaheim I don't think has good goaltending anyway, so that game looks like I would fade what the market seems to be indicating on that one, in my opinion. But my only plays today, as I mentioned, you can go look at my NFL video. Miami Dolphins plus 6.5. Right? It looks like you might have to take plus 6 now, but there's not much of a difference between those two. I said you could wait because it was possible that it might get to 7, but I don't think that's happening. So that's that play there. And then the New York Giants plus 4, which the market actually has kind of flipped on that one a little bit. I forgot to point that out because last night I pointed out that the higher cash percentage was actually on the Washington side, but now it looks like it's not. So it looks like it is moving. Looks like some of the cash is actually coming in less so on Washington now. Maybe some of the bigger bets are coming in and taking that hefty point spread with the Giants, and it looks like it's 4 with juice now. So it's actually, let me look quickly because it's actually possible you even see 4.5s show up on this one. Let me see. Not a huge difference between those two, but you'd rather have the hook than not, even if it's on the 4. I don't see any 4.5s out there at the moment, but it does look like the market is somewhat teetering on that direction, but it may not actually happen. And the market, I'll also point out, the market shifted towards what my lean was. I mentioned Broncos-Ravens last night. It does look like the cash percentage is actually higher on the Ravens now than it was last night. So I think my thoughts on that game might actually wind up being correct as well. I do lean to the Ravens to cover that number. I just think Denver is not as good as they appear, and that looks like a mismatch to me. And Baltimore's in like the bounce back spot. So even though, yeah, Denver's defense is really good, and may actually be the better of the two defenses. It's not like Baltimore's defense isn't good. Their defense is still good, but Baltimore is the way better offensive team. So, I mean, I think Baltimore's balanced. They're just the better team because their offense is so much better that if Baltimore gets into the lead, I don't see Denver being able to come back because Baltimore's defense is indeed still good, and it's going to force Bo Nix to have to try to do something through the air if Denver gets behind, and that Denver offense I don't think is really capable of being able to do that. Denver, they want to probably run the ball on the ground a little bit more, especially against Baltimore, because Baltimore, their defense is actually worse against the run than it is against the pass. So that's how I look at that. But if Denver falls behind, which seems quite likely in that one, they're going to have to start throwing the ball, and that plays into Baltimore's defensive strength more so, and Denver's, I would still say that's a weakness of Denver's, their passing offense. Their whole offense is a weakness, to be honest. So Denver falling behind, I don't see them being able to come back in that game. And because Baltimore with Derrick Henry, they can run the ball really well. If they have the lead and they're running the ball to try to try to take the clock down, that's also Baltimore's game. Like, they can still move the ball on offense when they're running it with Derrick Henry. So if they're trying to do that with the lead, running the ball a lot, they could even be padding the lead there because Derrick Henry is that good. So that's going to do it for me, man. No additional plays here, but those 2 NFL plays for today. Let's have a good day. I want to go 2-0, man. I want to complete a 3-0 NFL week to try to get back into the swing of things after an 0-7 NFL run. Let's get back to it, man. Or the last week I was 2-2, so not as bad, but not exactly what I wanted. But let's get back to it. The 0-7, those weeks were the most public weeks that maybe I've ever seen in the NFL, man. The public was winning everything, and when that happens, I'm usually not doing as well. Although my pick'em pools, actually, I'm still doing pretty well. I did not have a bad week any of those weeks, really. I think maybe one of the 2 weeks I did. But, all right, that's going to do it for me. Thanks for hanging out, Johnny, and peace out.